I still remember the sound of the coffee grinder every morning, that low, steady hum that filled the small cafe before the sun had even risen. The smell of roasted beans, the faint hiss of the espresso machine, and the soft creak of the wooden counter were the first things that greeted me each day. My grandfather Harold always said that mornings were the best time to feel alive. Before the world starts rushing, he'd say, you can still hear yourself think. For years I helped him run the café, a quiet little place at the corner of Willow Street. It wasn't much. The paint on the sign had started to peel. The chairs were mismatched. And sometimes, when it rained, the roof leaked near the back tables. But to me it was home. My grandfather had built this cafe with his own hands 50 years ago, long before I was born. And for him, it wasn't just a business. It was his life story poured into a cup of coffee. I started working there after college. Not because I didn't have dreams. I did. But because I couldn't leave him to run it alone. He was getting old, his hands weren't as steady, and he would sometimes forget to lock the till or mix up the orders. So I decided to help. I told myself it would be temporary, just until we could hire someone reliable. But months turned into years. Every morning I tied my hair up, put on the beige apron with the coffee cup logo stitched on the front, and opened the cafe doors at 6:30. The regulars would stroll in. The newspaper man who always ordered black coffee and a smile, the retired couple who shared one muffin between them, and the group of high school teachers who came in for takeaway lattes before work. I liked seeing them. They reminded me that life didn't have to be loud to be meaningful, but not everyone saw it that way. Especially my brother, Ethan. Ethan was the golden child. The one who never failed, never stumbled, never doubted himself. He had gone to law school, graduated with honors, and now worked at one of the top firms downtown. He drove a gleaming black SUV that looked like it had rolled straight out of a commercial, and every morning, without fail, he stopped by our cafe, not to see Grandpa or to grab a coffee, but to mock me. He'd lower his window just enough for his smug smile to peek through and say, "Morning, sis. Enjoying your tips?" Or sometimes, "Still waiting tables?" Guess ambition isn't contagious in this family. It wasn't just words, it was the tone, the effortless superiority in his voice, the way he said "waiting tables," like it was some kind of failure stamped on my forehead. I never responded. I'd just smile, wave, and go back inside. My grandfather didn't like conflict, and I didn't want to upset him. But inside, those words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Ethan had always been that way. Charming in public, cruel in private. Growing up, he was the star. Top grades, sports medals, college scholarships. I was the quiet one who liked books and stayed home to help Grandma with dinner. After she passed away, Grandpa and I grew even closer. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed to drift further away, visiting only on holidays, calling only when he needed something. Still, Grandpa loved him. He'd say things like, "Your brother's just busy," or, "He's got a lot on his plate." He never let me speak badly about Ethan. No matter how much it hurt, one morning, I remember wiping down the tables when Ethan pulled up, his SUV shining like a mirror. He leaned out and said, "You know, you could still apply for a real job. Maybe something that doesn't involve scrubbing tables." I didn't even look at him. "Good morning to you too," I said quietly. He laughed. "Come on, don't be sensitive. I'm just saying, you've got a degree. Don't waste it on coffee and crumbs." Grandpa came out just then, holding a plate of freshly baked muffins. He waved at Ethan. "Good morning, son." Ethan's voice softened immediately. "Morning, Grandpa. Smells great as always." And just like that, the warmth returned to the air. My grandfather had that effect. He could melt ice just by smiling. He offered Ethan a muffin, and Ethan accepted, pretending to be the perfect grandson. For a moment, I watched them, wondering how easily he could switch faces. When Ethan drove off, Grandpa looked at me and said gently, "He's proud of you, you know. He just doesn't say it right." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But deep down, I knew Ethan wasn't proud. He was ashamed. Ashamed that his sister worked behind a counter while he worked behind a desk. He saw me as small, and in his world, small meant unworthy. Still, I didn't let it stop me. The cafe gave me purpose, and Grandpa gave me peace. Every time I saw him wiping the counter with his old checkered cloth, humming that same tune from the 60s, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. But time doesn't slow down for anyone. Grandpa started getting tired more easily. Some mornings he'd sit by the window instead of helping me open up. His hands trembled when he lifted the coffee pot, and once he nearly dropped a tray. I told him to rest, to take it easy, but he'd just smile and say, "I'll rest when the coffee runs out." One evening, after closing, he sat across from me with 2 cups of tea instead of coffee. "You know," he said, "you've got a good heart, Lily. Not everyone values that these days. People chase titles, cars, and money, but kindness is worth more than all of that." I smiled. "Grandpa, you sound like a movie character." He laughed softly. "Maybe, but promise me something. Whatever happens, don't let anyone make you feel small for doing honest work." I nodded. I didn't know then how much those words would mean later. Weeks passed. Business slowed down. The city had grown around us, and fancy cafes with glass walls and digital menus were popping up everywhere. Our little shop felt like a relic from another time. I sometimes wondered if Ethan was right, if I was wasting my life on something that was already fading. But every time a customer smiled and said, "This coffee tastes like home," I knew I couldn't walk away. Then, one winter morning, Grandpa didn't wake up. He had gone peacefully in his sleep. The doctor said it was his heart. I remember sitting beside him, holding his cold hand, the sound of rain outside muffling everything else. The cafe felt unbearably quiet. No humming, no laughter, just silence, thick and heavy. Ethan came, of course. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than the cafe's monthly rent. He hugged me briefly and said, "He had a good run, that's all." No tears, no emotion. Just a statement. I didn't argue. I was too tired. The funeral was small, just a few regulars, neighbors, and us. Everyone spoke kindly of Grandpa, sharing stories about how he used to let people pay later if they didn't have enough money, or how he remembered everyone's favorite drink. I stood there listening, realizing how much one humble man had meant to so many people. After the service, Ethan mentioned that Grandpa's lawyer would read the will in a few weeks. I barely thought about it. Grandpa didn't have much, just the cafe, the apartment upstairs, and some savings. I assumed everything would be split between us. In the days that followed, I tried to keep the cafe open. It felt wrong to close it. Customers came in and offered condolences. Some left flowers. One old lady patted my hand and said, "Your grandfather would be proud you're keeping this place alive." But I wasn't sure how long I could. Bills were piling up, and without Grandpa's pension, things were tight. Ethan stopped by once, not to help, but to suggest selling the place. "It's sentimental, I get it," he said, stirring his cappuccino like a critic. "But you can't live off nostalgia. Sell it. Use your half of the money to start over. Maybe get a decent apartment, travel a little." I stared at him. "And what about Grandpa's memory?" "This cafe was his life," he shrugged. "Memories don't pay the bills, Lily. You're clinging to the past. It's time to grow up." That night I cried alone in the back room, not just because of what he said, but because part of me feared he might be right. When the lawyer finally called us in, I went with no expectations. I wore a simple black dress and sat quietly while Ethan scrolled through his phone, looking bored. The lawyer, an older man with silver glasses, opened a folder and cleared his throat. He began reading. It was mostly what I expected. A few small bequests to old friends, a donation to a local charity, and then my name and Ethan's. But when he reached the next lines, the room fell silent. Grandpa had left $6 million. Neither of us spoke. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and continued. "The inheritance will be distributed according to a condition stated by Mr. Harold in this will." A condition. I looked at Ethan, who had finally put his phone down. His eyes widened slightly, for the first time looking truly surprised. And that was when I realized this wasn't just an inheritance. This was something else. Something Grandpa had planned. Something that would change everything. When the lawyer said there was a condition, I felt the air tighten in the room. It was a quiet office. the kind with heavy wooden furniture and the faint smell of paper and polish. The blinds were half drawn, letting in narrow strips of sunlight that cut across the table like pale gold ribbons. For a moment, I could hear nothing except the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Ethan leaned forward, his usual confidence replaced with curiosity. "A condition?" he asked, his tone clipped but controlled. The lawyer nodded slowly and adjusted his glasses again. "Yes, Mr. Harold's will specifies that the inheritance, $6 million in total, will only be granted after one specific clause is fulfilled." I felt my heartbeat quicken. I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about my grandfather. He'd always been deliberate, thoughtful. If he had added a condition, it wasn't random. There was meaning behind it. The lawyer looked at me, then at Ethan, and began to read. "To my beloved grandchildren, Lily and Ethan, I leave the sum of $6 million, divided equally between them. However, the inheritance shall not be distributed immediately. The following condition must be met. The family café on Willow Street shall remain operational and profitable for 1 full calendar year after my passing. During this period, my granddaughter Lily shall have full managerial control, while my grandson Ethan shall offer financial and legal assistance as needed. Only after this 1-year period, upon verification by my attorney, shall the inheritance be released." The words echoed in my head. Lily shall have full managerial control. Ethan blinked, clearly processing what he'd just heard. Then he laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but a sharp, incredulous one. "You're kidding," he said, looking at the lawyer. "He can't be serious. She's in charge?" The lawyer's face remained expressionless. Mr. Harold was quite specific. "The cafe must remain open and profitable. Both of you must participate in maintaining it, but managerial decisions rest with Miss Lily." Ethan turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "This is ridiculous. She's a waitress, not a business owner." I wanted to say something, but my throat tightened. A part of me wanted to defend myself, to remind him how long I'd run that cafe while Grandpa's health declined. But I stayed calm. Grandpa had always told me that silence can be more powerful than shouting. The lawyer continued. "If either party withdraws from their responsibilities before the 1-year period ends, that individual's share will be forfeited and transferred to the other." That caught Ethan's attention. His head snapped toward the lawyer. "Wait, you mean if I quit, she gets all of it?" The lawyer nodded. "Correct. That was Mr. Harold's wish." The silence that followed was heavy, almost physical. I could feel Ethan's gaze on me, sharp, assessing, angry. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Unbelievable," he muttered. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. Because deep down, I understood. This was Grandpa's way of forcing us together, of making Ethan see the value of what he'd always mocked. It was his final lesson. As we left the office, Ethan stopped me near the door. "Don't think this changes anything," he said quietly, his jaw tight. "You might be in charge on paper, but you don't know how the real world works. I'll make sure you don't mess this up." I met his eyes and said softly, "Then I guess we'll see who's really capable, won't we?" For the first time in years, I saw something flicker behind his confident expression, uncertainty. That evening, I unlocked the cafe alone. The place smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee, and the fading light made the wooden tables glow. I sat down at Grandpa's old stool behind the counter and stared at the empty chairs. A year. 1 year to prove that I could keep this place alive, and to fulfill Grandpa's last wish. But I also knew what that really meant. I had to work alongside Ethan. The next morning, he arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, not a minute early. He wasn't wearing his usual crisp suit. Instead, he had on casual jeans and a polo shirt, though somehow he still looked like he didn't belong there. He walked in like a guest inspecting a property he'd never visit again. "All right," he said, looking around. "What's the plan, boss?" The word boss dripped with sarcasm. I took a deep breath. "The plan is to make this cafe profitable. That means more customers, better service, maybe a few upgrades." He smirked. "Upgrades? With what money? You're barely keeping the lights on." I opened the ledger and showed him the books. Grandpa had savings for emergencies. "I'm not touching them unless absolutely necessary. But I do need your help reviewing the lease agreement. The rent's going up next month." He flipped through the papers lazily, pretending to read. "You know, this whole setup is absurd. $6 million tied to a coffee shop? He could have just written us checks." "He wanted to teach us something," I said quietly. Ethan looked at me, amusement fading. "Teach me what? How to pour coffee?" "No," I replied. "Maybe how to respect it." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned away. "Whatever. Let's just get through this year." Days passed. He showed up occasionally, usually after his office hours, offering advice that sounded more like criticism. He'd stand by the counter, pointing out the chipped paint or the outdated menu fonts. "No wonder this place barely breaks even," he'd say. I ignored the barbs. Instead, I focused on small changes, adding homemade pastries, repainting the sign, rearranging the seating to make it cozier. I even started an online page for the café, sharing old photos of Grandpa and customers who'd been with us for decades. Slowly, people started noticing. Regulars brought friends. New customers came after seeing our posts. The mornings began to feel alive again. For the first time in months, I caught myself smiling while serving coffee. Ethan, however, didn't seem happy about it. One evening, he came in with a frustrated look. "I checked the revenue numbers," he said. "You actually improved sales." "How?" I shrugged. "By caring." He frowned, not liking that answer. "Don't get smug, Lily. You're not a business genius. This is temporary." But I could tell he was annoyed. Not because the cafe was doing well, but because it was happening under my leadership. Grandpa's words, "Lily shall have full managerial control," were still echoing somewhere in his mind, bruising his pride. A few weeks later, I found out he'd been talking to potential buyers behind my back. One of the customers mentioned overhearing him at the counter, discussing future property value. My hands trembled when I confronted him that night. "You tried to sell the cafe?" I asked, barely keeping my voice calm. He didn't even flinch. "Relax, I was just exploring options. The market's hot right now. You'd get more than it's worth." "That's not what Grandpa wanted." He sighed, as if I were a child refusing to see reason. "Grandpa's gone, Lily. We're here, in this place. It's outdated. You're clinging to nostalgia." I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "No, Ethan. You're clinging to control. You can't stand the fact that you don't have it." He didn't respond, but his silence said everything. From that day on, the tension grew. He'd show up late, question my every decision, and sometimes even accidentally forget to process supplier payments just to cause chaos. It was his quiet sabotage, a game of pride and power, but what he didn't expect was how much I'd changed. For years, I had tolerated his mockery, his arrogance, but now I had a purpose. Grandpa's cafe, Grandpa's legacy. And I wasn't about to let him destroy it. I started documenting everything, every purchase, every improvement, every message he sent. I created backup copies of our financial records and stored them separately. I spoke to the lawyer privately to confirm that if Ethan intentionally disrupted the business, it would count as forfeiting his share. The lawyer nodded solemnly and said, "Mr. Harold anticipated this possibility. You're protected." That night, I sat alone in the cafe. The lights dimmed. The sound of the clock ticking softly behind me. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, but resolve. Ethan thought I was naive, that I couldn't handle business or conflict. But he had underestimated me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, about showing him, and maybe even myself, that kindness didn't mean weakness. That the girl who served coffee every morning could stand up to the man who laughed from his SUV. As weeks turned into months, the cafe continued to thrive. Customers began sharing our story online, about a granddaughter keeping her grandfather's dream alive. Some wrote reviews calling it the most heartfelt cafe in town. Ethan noticed, of course. He started visiting less often, claiming he was busy with cases. But I knew the truth. The cafe had become a mirror he couldn't bear to look into. Then one morning I received a call from the lawyer. His voice was calm but firm. "Miss Lily," he said, "I think you should come in. There's been an update regarding the estate." I felt a chill run through me. When I arrived, Ethan was already there, his expression unreadable. The lawyer gestured for us to sit. There's something Mr. Harold added as an amendment before his passing. It's only to be revealed 6 months after the initial will reading. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Another twist? This is turning into a soap opera, but I stayed silent. Grandpa always had a reason. The lawyer opened a sealed envelope, unfolded the letter, and read aloud. To my grandchildren. If you are reading this, it means 6 months have passed. By now you've learned that money test character. I hope both of you are proving worthy. But I have one more truth to reveal. Something I never show. For days after that meeting with the lawyer, I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. Hidden within it is something only one of you can find. Not through greed, but through gratitude. It sounded like something out of a fable, the kind Grandpa used to tell me when I was a kid. But this wasn't a bedtime story. This was real. And it was starting to feel like another one of his lessons, wrapped in mystery. Ethan, of course, didn't see it that way. The moment we left the lawyer's office, he was already annoyed. Hidden within it, he scoffed as we stood in the parking lot. What is this, a treasure hunt? He was old, Lily, not a novelist. I stayed quiet. I had learned that silence irritated him more than any argument could. He kept going, his voice sharp. You realize this is probably nothing, right? Just one of his sentimental riddles. You'll waste your time chasing some imaginary secret. Maybe, I said softly, but maybe not. He laughed dryly, shaking his head as he unlocked his SUV. Unbelievable. You really think there's something in that dusty cafe worth finding? I looked at him then. Really looked. At the perfectly pressed shirt, the shiny watch, the polished car. For a man surrounded by so much, he looked empty. Yes, I said. I think there's something worth finding. You just wouldn't recognize it. He drove off without replying, tires screeching slightly on the gravel. That night, I stayed late at the cafe. It was quiet, the air smelling faintly of coffee grounds and wood polish. I walked slowly through every corner, touching the walls, the shelves, the counter where Grandpa used to lean and tell stories. I wasn't looking for gold or documents or keys. I didn't even know what I was looking for. But something told me this secret wasn't material. It was something deeper. I sat at Grandpa's old stool and opened the drawer beneath it. Inside, there were a few old receipts, a photograph of him and Grandma smiling under the cafe sign, and a small notebook bound with twine. I hadn't seen it before. The cover was worn, the edges soft from years of use. I opened it carefully. Inside were notes written in Grandpa's shaky handwriting, mostly recipes, inventory lists, and reminders. But on the last few pages, there were short reflections, almost like a diary. One of the lines caught my eye. I built this place with love, but it will be rebuilt with understanding. Only the one who listens will hear what it's trying to say. I read that line over and over. Only the one who listens. It felt like a clue, but to what, I didn't yet know. Over the next few weeks, business carried on as usual. Customers kept coming, and the cafe's reputation continued to grow. People often told me how the place felt different now, warmer, lighter. I liked hearing that. It made me feel like Grandpa's spirit was still here, somewhere in the walls. Ethan, meanwhile, had become more distant. He barely showed up anymore, except when the lawyer needed documents signed. When he did visit, he made sarcastic remarks about how sentimental marketing was apparently working for me. One afternoon, he walked in with a woman, tall, elegant, probably a client or a date. She looked around with polite curiosity. "So this is the famous cafe," she said, smiling. Ethan smirked. Famous might be a stretch. But yes, this is where my sister plays entrepreneur. Her smile faltered slightly, but she said nothing. I served them coffee, quietly observing how she looked at him. Admiration mixed with something like confusion. Maybe she saw what I had seen my whole life, that his confidence had cracks. When they left, she gave me a kind smile and whispered, "You have a beautiful place." I nodded, thanking her softly. For some reason, that one kind remark meant more to me than all of Ethan's barbed words put together. Later that night, while cleaning up, I found something under one of the old floorboards near the counter. A small metal box, dusty and cold to the touch. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. It was locked, but the lock was rusty, weak. I pried it open gently with a screwdriver. Inside were a few folded papers, an old photo of Grandpa and Ethan when Ethan was a child, and a sealed envelope addressed to "Whoever finds this." I held my breath as I opened it. Inside was a letter, written in Grandpa's familiar, uneven handwriting. "If you've found this, you've already done what I hoped. Looked closer. This cafe isn't just bricks and beans. It's a story about choices. I've watched how both of you lived. One with pride, one with patience. If you're reading this, you've already shown which one you are." My throat tightened as I read further. I never told Ethan the full story of how this cafe began. It wasn't just my dream. It was his grandmother's. She sold her jewelry to help me start it, and she made me promise to keep it in the family. She believed in hard work, not shortcuts. I hope one of you inherited that belief. I blinked back tears. The words felt alive, like he was sitting beside me again. You won't find money here, only meaning. But that meaning might be what saves you when money runs out. If you ever doubt your path, remember this. Real wealth is the peace that comes from doing right, even when no one sees it. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. It wasn't about inheritance or riddles. It was about values, gratitude, patience, integrity. But part of me also realized something else. Grandpa's words were a mirror, and Ethan would never understand them. The next morning, I told Ethan I'd found something. He came in with his usual swagger, holding his coffee cup like a badge of superiority. "So," he said, leaning on the counter, "found the secret treasure yet?" "Maybe," I replied. That got his attention. "What do you mean, maybe? You found something, didn't you?" "I found a letter," I said slowly, "and a photo. Grandpa wrote it before he died." He straightened. "And what does it say?" "It says that the cafe was Grandma's dream too, that she sacrificed a lot for it." He frowned. And it says the one who truly listens will understand its meaning." Ethan rolled his eyes. "So nothing, just more sentimental nonsense." I smiled faintly. "Maybe to you, but to me it's everything." He stared at me for a moment, then laughed under his breath. "You're unbelievable, Lily. You always fall for this emotional stuff. You think wisdom can pay bills?" "No," I said softly, "but it can protect you from making choices you'll regret." He looked at me sharply, maybe sensing that there was more behind my calm words. Over the next few months, his visits became less frequent, but his interference grew. He started sending me legal notices, small things at first, disguised as business recommendations. One suggested we incorporate the cafe. Another advised liquidating low-value assets. I knew what he was doing. He was trying to force me into mistakes, technical missteps that could make the business unprofitable, disqualifying both of us from the inheritance. But I didn't react. I played along, politely acknowledging his suggestions but never implementing them. I met with the lawyer often, keeping every receipt, every document airtight. I could feel my patience turning into quiet strength. And slowly, Ethan's own impatience began to work against him. One day, a regular customer, a local journalist, approached me after finishing her coffee. "You know," she said, "your story would make a great article. A granddaughter keeping her grandfather's dream alive, even under legal pressure? It's inspiring." I hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe someday." She did write it, though, a small piece in a local paper. It spread quickly online. Suddenly, more people visited the cafe, curious about the legacy coffee shop. Our sales doubled. When Ethan saw the article, he called me furious. "You used this for publicity? How dare you exploit his death for attention?" I stayed calm. "It's not exploitation if it honors his memory. You're playing the saint, but you're just as manipulative as anyone else," he snapped. "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe I just finally learned how to survive in your world without becoming like you." He hung up. That night, I sat in the cafe again, looking at Grandpa's photo on the wall. For the first time, I whispered aloud, I think I understand now. The secret wasn't hidden in the walls or the floor. It was in the way you made people feel, seen, valued, loved. That's what you meant by gratitude. I felt a strange peace wash over me. But the story wasn't over. Because 3 months later, Ethan made his boldest move yet. He filed a legal claim stating that I had mismanaged the cafe's finances, accusing me of using Grandpa's funds for personal expenses. It was a calculated lie, one he knew would force an investigation. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office again, hearing the words, and feeling that old burn of humiliation. But this time I didn't cry. I simply handed over my records. Organized, complete, transparent. The lawyer reviewed everything carefully. A week later, he called us both in. "Miss Lily's records are clean," he said firmly. "In fact, the cafe's profits have doubled since Mr. Harold's passing. If anyone has failed to fulfill his duties, it's Mr. Ethan, whose absence and disruptive behavior have been documented." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You can't prove—" "I can," the lawyer interrupted. "Mr. Harold's condition is clear. Withdrawal or obstruction leads to forfeiture." The words hung in the air like a slow bell toll. Ethan's face turned pale. "You can't do this," he said quietly, almost to himself. The lawyer folded his hands. "I'm not doing anything. Your grandfather did, and just like that it was over." He left the room without another word. I sat there for a while, the lawyer's voice fading into the background, replaced by the faint hum of the world outside. I didn't feel triumphant, just calm. Grandpa had written his revenge in kindness. He didn't punish Ethan directly. He simply created a world where Ethan's arrogance would undo itself, and where my patience would finally be seen for what it truly was: strength. That night, I lit a small candle in the cafe and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa." In your way, calm, quiet, and fair. Outside, the neon sign flickered gently, painting the street in soft amber light. And somewhere in the stillness, I thought I heard his voice again, gentle as always. "Told you, mornings were the best time to feel alive." When the first morning of my new life began, it didn't look that different from the old ones. I still woke before the sun rose, brewed my coffee in the same chipped mug, and stood by the window as the light spread across the street. But something had shifted. An invisible weight that used to sit on my chest was gone. For years I had started every day with a quiet ache, thinking of the cafe, of Grandpa's tired eyes, of my brother's taunts echoing from his SUV. Now, as I watched the city wake, I felt no heaviness. Only calm. Maybe that's what real revenge feels like. Not loud, not dramatic, but silent and freeing. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of quiet planning. I had officially taken ownership of the cafe, the small apartment upstairs, and a few other assets Grandpa had owned. But the rest, the $6 million, that came with conditions. I could claim it only if I kept the cafe running for a full year, ensuring that it remained profitable, and that all the staff continued to be paid fairly. It was Grandpa's way of reminding me that wealth meant nothing if it didn't sustain people. So I decided to start exactly where he would have wanted, with the heart of the place. The cafe needed work. The paint was peeling in corners, the chairs wobbled, and the espresso machine sputtered like it was on its last breath. But I didn't rush to change everything. I walked through the cafe every night after closing, touching the counters, the old framed photos, the clock that had stopped the day Grandpa fell ill. I talked to his memory while I planned every little improvement. The new lighting, the fresh wooden counters, the smell of roasted beans that would welcome every customer. People in the neighborhood had heard about the will. News travels fast in small towns, and faster when money is involved. Some were kind, offering support, remembering my grandfather fondly. Others whispered that I was lucky, that maybe I didn't deserve it, that I was just a waitress who got handed a fortune. But I didn't correct anyone. I didn't explain that I hadn't taken a single cent yet, that I was still earning every dollar the hard way. Let them think what they wanted. Silence was stronger than any argument. Meanwhile, my brother Ethan's silence was louder than all of it. After the reading of the will, he hadn't called, hadn't shown up, hadn't even sent a message. But I knew him. That kind of silence wasn't peace. It was plotting. Ethan had grown up believing he could bend the world to his will, just like he bent people in courtrooms. The idea that Grandpa had trusted me more than him must have burned him from the inside. Still, I didn't plan revenge. I only planned to rebuild. By the 3rd month, the cafe began to bloom again. The walls were painted a warm, creamy beige. I had hung new lights, soft and low, that gave the place a cozy glow at dusk. The regulars came back, the retired teacher who read poetry in the corner, the delivery driver who always ordered the strongest coffee, the couple who had met here years ago. Even strangers began to stop by after hearing about the old place with new life. I had changed the name slightly, from Miller's Cafe to Miller and Granddaughter. It was subtle, but it meant something. Every time someone ordered a latte, they were reminded of the bond that built the place. Then, one cold Thursday morning, he came back. I was wiping down the counter when the doorbell chimed. I looked up, and there he was. My brother, standing in his expensive gray coat, polished shoes, and that same smirk that once made my stomach tighten. "Nice setup," he said, scanning the cafe. "Didn't think you'd actually pull it off." I kept my voice steady. "Coffee or just criticism today?" He chuckled. "You've grown a little spine, huh?" He leaned on the counter. "How's the inheritance holding up? Grandpa's little test still going?" I didn't rise to his bait. I simply poured a cup and set it before him. "On the house, for old time's sake." He picked it up, took a slow sip, and looked around again. "You know, I could have helped you run this place. With my experience, my business sense. With your arrogance," I interrupted softly. He raised an eyebrow, caught off guard. "Careful, little sister. You don't want to forget who used to pay your bills." I met his gaze calmly. "And you don't want to forget who built the walls that sheltered you." That was when something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but confusion. Like he realized I wasn't the same person he used to mock. I wasn't the timid waitress he'd drive past with a smirk. I was standing on ground that was mine, not borrowed, not inherited out of pity, but earned through patience. He left after that, saying he'd drop by again sometime, though I could tell he had no reason to, other than curiosity. 2 weeks later, I found out what he was really up to. A friend from the town council called me, hesitating before speaking. "I don't want to alarm you," he said, "but your brother's been asking questions about the property lease. Says he's interested in buying the lot next to yours. Maybe for a new cafe chain." I laughed softly when I hung up. It was so predictable, it almost felt nostalgic. Ethan couldn't stand being outshined, especially by me. He wanted to compete, not to build something, but to prove he could destroy mine. But I didn't panic. Grandpa had always said, "When people show you who they are, thank them. It makes planning easier." So, I planned quietly. I spent nights reviewing the business accounts, meeting with suppliers, negotiating better deals, strengthening the foundation of my small empire. I made sure every paper, every legal document, every contract was ironclad, and I kept smiling for the customers every morning as if nothing was happening. By spring, Ethan opened his cafe across the street. Big sign, modern decor, expensive machines, loud music, the kind of place where people went to be seen, not to find peace. He named it the Mill. I almost laughed at the irony. He couldn't even resist copying part of Grandpa's name. For the first few weeks, people flocked to his place. The parking lot was full of shiny cars, the walls buzzed with laughter and selfies. Meanwhile, mine stayed quiet, calm and steady. The regulars still came, the same soft music played, and I still served every cup with a smile. But then something happened, something you can't fake with money or marketing. People began drifting back to my side. They said my coffee tasted like it had care in it. They said the air here felt real. A journalist from a local paper wrote a small piece calling Miller and Granddaughter the soul of the neighborhood. Slowly, the mill began losing its glow. Ethan tried discounts, ads, influencers. Nothing worked. I didn't gloat, though. Every time I saw him drive by, face tight with frustration, I only thought of Grandpa's calm eyes. This wasn't about winning. It was about restoring balance. One evening, just as I was closing, I saw Ethan standing across the street, staring at my sign. His cafe was empty. The lights behind him flickered weakly. For a moment, he looked small, not like the man who once towered over me with his degrees and arrogance, but like a boy who'd lost his way. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then he crossed the road and came in. "I can't believe this," he muttered, pacing the floor. You actually did it." "Did what?" I asked gently. "You turned a dying cafe into a success. Everyone's talking about you, about this place." He looked at me, anger mixed with disbelief. "How?" I wiped my hands on a towel and said simply, "By caring." "The thing you can't fake," he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You always think you're better than me." "No," I said. "I just stopped believing you were better than me." He stared at me for a long moment, then left. No threats, no smug lines this time. Just silence, and I think that silence hurt him more than any words could have. That night, as I locked up, I realized my revenge was already complete. Not through anger, not through schemes, but through growth. I hadn't set out to destroy him. I had only built myself. And in doing so, I showed him, and everyone, the power of quiet persistence. But the story wasn't over yet. Because the year wasn't done, and Grandpa's condition, the one tied to the $6 million, was about to reveal something even I didn't see coming. The year was almost over when the lawyer called me again. His voice on the phone had that same steady calm he always carried, but this time there was something different behind it, a kind of warmth. "Miss Miller," he said, "we'll need you to come in next week. It's time to finalize your grandfather's estate. You've fulfilled the primary condition." For a moment, I didn't respond. The words hung in the air like something unreal. It had been a full year already. 12 months of waking before sunrise, wiping counters, making coffee, counting receipts, managing suppliers, smiling through exhaustion, all for a promise that had once felt abstract. Now it was real. The condition was complete. I had kept the cafe alive and thriving. That night, I closed the doors a little later than usual. The air outside was cool, carrying the smell of rain and roasted beans. I walked slowly through the cafe, running my fingers along the counters and walls, the way I did in the beginning. Everything had changed. The furniture, the lights, the energy. Yet somehow it still felt like Grandpa's place. His spirit lingered in the air, in every corner, as if he had never really left. I whispered softly, "I did it, Grandpa. Just like you asked." When I went to the lawyer's office the next morning, I felt no nervousness, only quiet pride. He greeted me with that professional half-smile of his and gestured toward a seat. Beside him on the desk was a folder, thick, sealed, and stamped. "As you know," he began, "your grandfather's will included a conditional clause regarding the distribution of his remaining assets. You've met those conditions. The cafe is not only functioning, it's flourishing." He paused, glancing at some documents. "And the staff retention, the payroll, the profit margins, all have improved substantially." I smiled faintly. He always believed in discipline over shortcuts. The lawyer nodded. He did, which is why there's one more detail you should be aware of. He opened the folder and slid a letter toward me. Handwritten, folded neatly, with my name across it in Grandpa's familiar cursive. My breath caught for a moment. I hadn't seen that handwriting since before his illness. "He asked that this be given to you only after the full year," the lawyer said quietly. "And also that your brother be present." "Ethan?" I asked, frowning. "Yes, I've already called him." "He'll be here shortly." My first instinct was to object, to ask why he needed to be part of this again. But something in me whispered to stay calm. Grandpa wouldn't have done this without reason, so I waited. 15 minutes later, Ethan arrived, looking sharper than ever, but with eyes that carried a dullness I hadn't seen before. The confident arrogance was gone, replaced by something heavier. Maybe reality had humbled him, or maybe life had. Either way, he didn't speak much. He just nodded stiffly at me and sat down. The lawyer cleared his throat. "I'll read this letter aloud as instructed." He unfolded the paper carefully. Grandpa's words began in that simple, kind tone that I could almost hear in my head. "My dear grandchildren, if you're hearing this, it means a full year has passed since I left you. I hope in that time you've both learned something about yourselves and about each other. I never wanted money to divide you, but I knew it might. Ethan, you've always been ambitious, sharp, and determined. You measure success by results, not intentions. There's value in that. But you've also mistaken pride for strength and arrogance for confidence. I hope by now you've seen where that road leads. And to my dear granddaughter, I saw the heart you tried to hide behind humility. I knew you were capable of more than waiting tables. You had patience, and that was your greatest strength. True power doesn't rush. It grows quietly, just like you have. The money, $6 million, was never the test. The test was about character, about how you'd choose to live when the world wasn't watching. Ethan, you may feel I favored your sister, but that's not true. You were given every opportunity to build your empire your way. She was given only her hands, her heart, and a café. Now you both know which one truly holds value." The lawyer paused, glancing at us before continuing. "Therefore, I've made my final decision. The $6 million will be split, but not equally. $5 million shall go to my granddaughter, for her perseverance and integrity. The remaining $1 million shall go to my grandson, provided he agrees to one condition. He must close the mill permanently and donate its property to the community library fund. My estate has seen enough division. Let it end in something that serves others. With love, Grandpa." The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock behind the lawyer's desk. Ethan didn't move. He just stared at the paper, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. I watched him, half expecting a storm of anger, maybe even another one of his bitter remarks. But none came. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, quieter than I'd ever heard it. "So, he really gave you everything?" I shook my head gently. "No, he gave me work. He gave you a chance." He scoffed softly. $1 million and a moral lecture." "It's more than that," I said. "It's a start, if you want it to be." He didn't reply. Just sat there, eyes fixed somewhere far away. Maybe he was replaying all those mornings when he'd driven past me, tossing jokes from his car window. Maybe he was remembering how easily he'd dismissed both me and Grandpa's little cafe. The lawyer asked him to sign an acknowledgement form. Ethan took the pen, hesitated, then signed without another word. When he left, he didn't look back. For the first time, I didn't feel anger toward him, only a kind of sad understanding. When I was alone, the lawyer handed me the sealed envelope with the transfer details. My fingers trembled slightly, not from excitement, but from gratitude. I knew what I wanted to do with that money, and it wasn't to build a mansion or travel the world. That night, I went back to the cafe. It was quiet as always, with the warm glow of the lamp spilling onto the street. I brewed myself a cup of coffee and sat in the corner where Grandpa used to read his newspaper. I placed the letter beside me and whispered again, "I hope I made you proud." Over the next few months, I used part of the inheritance to expand the cafe into something even more meaningful. I created a scholarship fund in Grandpa's name for local students who wanted to study hospitality and business. Kids who, like me, once thought their dreams were too small to matter. I renovated the upstairs apartment into a community reading room. Every weekend, people came, families, students, even elderly folks, to share stories, sip coffee, and find peace. Miller and Granddaughter wasn't just a cafe anymore. It had become a living memory, a place where patience met purpose. One afternoon, as I arranged books on a shelf, I heard the doorbell chime. When I turned, I saw Ethan standing there, not in his suit, not in his polished shoes, but in jeans and a simple shirt. He looked tired but lighter. I closed it, he said simply. The mill. I donated the building. The library plans are moving forward. I smiled. Grandpa would be happy. He nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe he knew what he was doing after all. We sat together for a while. Two people who had once been enemies without even realizing it. No grand apologies, no dramatic reconciliations. Just quiet understanding. Sometimes that's all forgiveness needs. Months turned into seasons. Life settled into a calm rhythm again. The cafe grew, not in size, but in soul. People began calling it the heart of the town. Every day I still woke up early, brewed my first cup, and stood by the window, the same way I used to. But now, when I looked out, I didn't see an SUV pulling up with mockery inside it. I saw peace. Sometimes I'd think back to all those mornings, the ones when I felt small, humiliated, stuck in a life I hadn't chosen. And then I'd think about how quietly life had turned the tables, not through anger, not through schemes, but through patience. Grandpa used to say, "Revenge doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just lives better." He was right. My revenge wasn't in taking anything away from my brother. It was in becoming the person he said I could never be. Calm, capable, content. Now, whenever someone new walks into the cafe and asks about the name, I tell them it's more than a name. It's a story about love, loss, pride, and quiet redemption. And sometimes, when I lock up at night and the lights dim one by one, I still hear his voice. Gentle, proud and steady. You did well, kiddo. You kept the heart of it alive. I smile, whisper back into the empty air. Thank you, Grandpa, for teaching me that silence can be the loudest victory of all. And that's how my calm revenge came full circle. Not in flames, but in peace. If you enjoyed this story, if it reminded you that patience can be the sharpest weapon, that dignity can outlast cruelty, then I invite you to stay connected. Like, share, and subscribe to My Calm Revenge for more stories where justice whispers instead of shouts. Stories of quiet strength, slow triumph, and the kind of revenge that heals instead of hurts. Because sometimes, the calmest souls carry the deepest victories.